speakers for today, Mr. Greg Green, veteran of Operation Desert Storm 1990-91, and his wife, Angie.
Good morning, staff and students of USD 105, community members, and fellow vets. Veterans come in all shapes and sizes, young and old, rich and poor, black and white, and nearly every category in between. They are men and women who served or are still serving America. And their families are diverse as well. We need to remember the wives who briefly but anxiously dreaded every doorbell ring or telephone call as their husbands witnessed unspeakable horrors while fighting in hard-to-pronounce villages that most Americans could never find on a map. We need to remember the modern military families who deal with frequent address changes, interrupted employment by spouses, and a disproportionate sharing of parental responsibilities. For what they do for us, military families should also be honored on Veterans Day.
Mrs. Diane Vapp is a longtime friend of ours, and when she asked Greg and I to speak at this program today, I was like, me too? But after much thought, and even though it's not usually done this way, I decided it might be good for me to talk and to paint a picture in your minds and in your heads from an expectant mother, a mother of a 2.5-year-old, much like the little girl in the front row here, and a young wife left at home. I can't say that I was totally excited for Greg to join the Army National Guard when he came home from work one day with that idea in his head. We were just starting on our own in Dodge City at 19 and 20 years of age. So the extra income would be nice, and it would only be the part-time Army, right? My parents weren't sold on the idea, and I remember Greg saying to them, "It's not like there will be a war." I supported Greg's decision. It seemed like his thing, and he had the courage to join, and he had a strong will to serve. It was all fine and dandy for the first few years, just 1 week in a month, and he was able to split up his training into 2 summers. Basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina took 2 months, and AIT took 3 months in Fort Gordon, Georgia. We hadn't started our family yet. I finished cosmetology school and started my first job as a stylist, and then decided to move back home while Greg was in Georgia. Little Cedric came to us 9 months later, named after an Army buddy from South Carolina. Greg was called to active duty Thanksgiving weekend almost 25 years ago. Shortly after I found out I was expecting our second child, Whitney. Just when I was going to need my husband the most, they were taking him away. There must be some mistake, I thought. We went through the motions, and luckily Greg's unit was stationed a few months in Fort Riley before deployment. I worked enough during the week, leaving Baldwin Cedric at daycare so we could get a motel in Junction City and see Daddy on the weekends. Cedric really just wanted to stay in Fort Riley at the barracks. He thought they were so cool, and he just loved Daddy's bunk bed. Once Greg was deployed, I got involved in some support groups in this community and in the Colby one. I talked to Jesus a whole lot. I tried not to watch too much CNN, and I lived for the letters in the mail or the once-a-week phone call. You see, we didn't have cell phones back then. And the troops were only allowed to use the limited amount of phones once a week. It was so expensive, but I had to hear his voice. I still have a box of touching letters. I'll never forget the homecoming. I was close to my due date, and it's frowned upon to travel then. But my doctor knew he wasn't going to keep me home. They have medical facilities at Fort Riley. My doctor joked that I should name our baby Norman, after the Army General Norman Schwarzkopf during Desert Storm. Good thing she was a girl. The family members of Greg's unit waited in a helicopter hangar. Emotions everywhere. Music was playing. Eye of the Tiger, to be exact. And they marched in, single file, each person looking for their soldiers. I could hardly hold Cedric so he could see. There's my daddy, he said. Greg held his head high with just a little different look in his eye. He had served his country, but missed his family. Now, I don't regret that Greg joined the Army. The experience, the relationships, and the strengths it created have made us who we are today. I thank God, our families, and our community for helping us through. And I'm a very proud wife of veteran Greg Green, and I respect all of the vets, and I have compassion for their families too. Thank you all for serving our country.
I joined the 161st Field Artillery National Army Guard Unit in Dodge City in 1986. Angie was going to cosmetology school. A co-worker where I was working asked me to join the National Guard. The extra income seemed enticing, and the 1 weekend a month and 2 week summer camp didn't seem too bad, right? I thought, there isn't going to be anything major going on in the world. There's nothing to worry about, right? So the National Guard's mission is as follows. Whether the call is coming from the state governor or directly from the President of the United States, Guard soldiers are always ready and always there. You serve your community, your state, and your country. As a Guard soldier, you can expect your primary area of operation to be your home state, following the leadership of your state adjutant general and governor. This may include community efforts responding to wildfires or floods, or may include serving overseas and training foreign forces. You will also be prepared to mobilize when directed by the President. This may include overseas service or domestic, such as serving along the U.S.-Mexico border. So what does the National Guard do? Whatever is needed, wherever it is needed. As Angie had stated before, we were visiting family on Thanksgiving in 1990, and when we returned home, I had a message on the answering machine from Galen Hrenik, stating that my new Guard unit, the 170th Maintenance Company out of Colby, had been called to active duty. We spent time preparing to leave from the Colby unit before spending what seemed like an eternity in Fort Riley. Finally, on February 11th, we started our journey to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Our maintenance unit spent many weeks getting various vehicle types ready for action if need be. The one event that I will never forget was on February 25th. A Scud missile hit a barracks that was housing an Army Reserve unit from Pennsylvania. As the barracks was only a mile or so from where we were staying, we heard and felt the missile hit. 27 were killed, 98 were wounded. Since the place we were staying was being built as a hospital that was taken over by the U.S. government to be used for housing, Some of the wounded were brought into our compound. Luckily, there was a medical unit from North Carolina also staying in the same building. One of my roommates went out into the compound to help with the wounded. After all had been treated and moved on to better facilities, my roommate came back into her room. As he sat there on his cot, looking down at his hands covered in blood. I will never forget that look on his face. As the ground war had ended, our mission focus changed to preparing military vehicles to be returned to the U.S. This involved washing all of the unwanted desert sand, according to the USDA, out of all the vehicles, ranging from tanks, which had to find desert sand compacted into the engine compartments and every nook and cranny, to also washing trucks, Humvees, and every other military vehicle. This became a 24/7 job for our unit as we split into 3 8-hour shifts to accomplish this mission. On June 17th, we finally returned to Fort Riley to a wonderful homecoming ceremony. This was very emotional to us and our families. After serving my 6-year active commitment, I was placed on inactive duty for 2 years, which I could have been recalled back by the National Guard into service if needed. As nothing more happened after that, I received my honorable discharge from the Army. I feel proud to have served in the military, as my dad and 2 brothers had also served. When then Governor Ronald Reagan introduced returning POW John McCain at a speaking engagement in 1974, the future president asked, "Where do we find such men?" We find them in our streets, in our offices, the shops and working places of our country, and on the farms. In other words, President Reagan was referring to ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. While the numbers are decreasing, too many veterans are still homeless. As recently as 2014, an estimated 50,000 homeless veterans were identified in communities around this nation. That is roughly the population of Galveston, Texas. And let us remember the estimated 20 veterans a day who commit suicide, and approximately 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who have experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. We should frequently remind employers that veterans have been tested under pressure, have completed unique training, and have displayed the leadership qualities that would benefit almost any organization. Hiring veterans is not just to show gratitude, it's simply smart business. Veterans Day is an important but symbolic way of saying thanks. We should insist that our elected officials produce meaningful laws and public policies that will enhance the quality of life for veterans and their families. And I hope newly elected President Donald Trump, on his victory speech, acceptance speech the other night, how he vowed that he said he would help our veterans. And I so hope he does. The American Legion is dedicated to remembering the legacy of all veterans because of what these men and women have done for us. Matters to America. It matters to people overseas who were liberated from tyranny due to the sacrifices of our military families. Ladies and gentlemen, veterans have preserved the country we all love so much. Thank you again for allowing me to speak on behalf of our nation veterans. God bless you, God bless our nation's veterans, and God bless the USA.